Welcome to CEC Online Lectures. Today I will talk about paradoxes. Let me start with a story about Hiranyakashipu from the Bhagavad Puran. Brahma granted Hiranyakashipu his wish that he could not be killed inside his residence or outside his residence, neither at daytime nor at night, neither by a human, nor by an animal, nor by a god, nor by a demon, neither on the ground, nor in the air, neither by animate nor inanimate weapons. Yet, Brahma does not grant Hiranyakashipu immortality. Now, this is a riddle. If Hiranyakashipu cannot die, then is he not immortal? Think about it for some time, even if you know the story. How could Hiranyakashipu be killed? As the story goes, Vishnu, in the form or guise of Narsimha, kills Hiranyakashipu. But to do that, he has to resolve the riddle. Vishnu is a good logician and is able to resolve the riddle. Now, most paradoxes can be thought of broadly as riddles. We can refer to etymology and say that the word paradox is derived from the Greek word meaning contrary to belief. But it is better not to start with any definition of paradox, but rather give common sense and historical examples of what have been thought of as paradoxes. Let us say most paradoxes are like riddles. It seems that it is not possible to solve them, but with some effort they can be solved. You may recall from childhood the riddle of a boatman who has to transfer a lion, a goat, and a heap of grass across the river safely. He can take only one of them in the boat. If he takes the lion first, then the goat will eat the pile of grass. If he takes the grass first, then the lion will eat the goat. So he must take the goat across first, as the lion won't eat the grass. Now he comes back, let us say he takes the lion across. But when he comes back the next time for the grass, then the lion would have eaten the goat. And if he had taken the grass the second time and come back for the lion, then the goat would have eaten the grass. So it seems like he won't be able to take all three across safely. Well, the boatman is no dummy. He can solve such a simple riddle. So first he takes the goat. The second time he takes the lion. And on the way back, he brings the goat back, leaves it in its original place, and takes the grass. Leaving that with the lion, he finally comes back to pick up the goat. This is a relatively simple riddle which can be solved easily. There are much more difficult riddles, such as the one in the Bhagavad Purana, which nonetheless is shown to be solved. Now, most paradoxes can be solved with some effort and hard work. But you must remember, paradoxes are not contradictions. They sometimes appear to be contradictions, but on close analysis, it can be demonstrated that they are not contradictions. However, perennial philosophical paradoxes are not even difficult to solve, but sometimes cannot be solved, or at least cannot be solved with all the knowledge that is available at the time. Hence, they are more devastating than riddles. Let us look at a day-to-day life example. Your friends expect you to go with them on a long drive on the coming Sunday. Your parents expect you to come home for a day-long puja on the same Sunday. What do? Now, is this a riddle? Not really. Is this a paradox? Not really. Rather, it is a dilemma. If you go for the long drive, your parents won't be happy. If you go for the day-long puja, your friends may not be happy. Dilemmas also need to be resolved, and all dilemmas do have a solution, at least practically. Here, you might be able to convince your friends to come with you for the day long puja, as it can be an outing for them. Now, dilemmas, especially moral dilemmas, are not only important in our day to day lives but also in philosophy, especially in ethics. We're all familiar with the famous dilemma that Arjuna faces at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. Should he fight in the righteous battle against the Kauravas to put an end to their despotic rival? But if he does that, he will be killing his own cousins, uncles, teachers, and friends. Should he kill them? He is in despair because of this dilemma. Krishna appears to help him find his way out of the dilemma. And what ensues is a long dialogue. And as we all know, Arjuna resolves the dilemma by choosing to enter the battle. The decision was not easy, and it involved a great deal of knowledge and understanding, which Arjuna does not have at the beginning of the dialogue, but has it by the end of the dialogue. So paradoxes are different from dilemmas. However, they have the common characteristic that they require our full attention. We need to use all our intellectual resources to first understand the paradox, then attempt to solve it, and sometimes to realize that it cannot be solved. Before we turn to the historical examples of paradoxes, let us consider Camus' paradox of life. Now, Albert Camus was an Algerian French philosopher, novelist, and journalist. He introduced the concept of absurd into the world of philosophy. And Camus claims that life is meaningless, but humans are driven to find meaning in life. If life is meaningless, then no meaning will be found in life. So this is a paradox. Someone contemplating this paradox may decide to commit suicide by thinking that there is no point in living if life has no meaning. Camus does not think that committing suicide will solve the paradox, because after you die, the paradox will continue for everyone else. So he offers the solution of giving your own meaning to life, since in itself life is meaningless. I'm sure you all have heard the story of a race between a hare and a tortoise. The two start the race at the starting point at the same time. The hare dashes off while the tortoise proceeds at its slow speed. In the end, the tortoise wins. How does that happen? Well, the hare decides to take a nap in the middle, and the tortoise passes him and sees him napping. He naps too long, and by the time he restarts, the tortoise has crossed the finish line and won the race. Now, Zeno of Elea, which is present-day Sicily, was a master of formulating paradoxes, and he developed a complicated paradox related to such a story. So let us see what the paradox is. Zeno was a disciple of Parmenides, and Parmenides was a monist who believed that there appears to be plurality, but in reality there is no plurality. Everything is one. Also, everything is at rest. There appears to be motion, but in fact there is no motion. There is always the same being without movement. Now, most of Zeno's paradoxes are to support Parmenides' contention that there is no motion. So what does Zeno believe? He believes that things appear to be moving, to be traversing from one spot to the other, but in reality there is no motion. Everything is at rest. Interestingly, one law of motion in Newton's 3 laws is that everything at rest remains at rest unless a force moves it, and you all know it. Anyway, I now give a rendition of Zeno's most famous paradox by adapting it to an example of what we are familiar with. Suppose you have to walk from India Gate to Rashtrapati Bhavan. Let us say it is 3 kilometers distance. So, when you start from India Gate, you will have to first travel half the distance, that is 1.5 kilometers. This will take some time, let us say some X seconds. Once you reach the halfway mark, you will then have to travel half the remaining distance, that is 750 meters. This will take Y seconds. Then again you will have to travel half the remaining distance, that is 375 meters, and that will again take some time, let us say Z seconds. You can see that the closer you reach to Rashtrapati Bhavan, you will still have to travel half the remaining distance, which will again take you some time, no matter how little it is. The process will go on to infinity, which will, with each step, taking some time. So it will take infinite time to travel from India Gate to Rashtrapati Bhavan. We could think of it in another way. In order to reach Rashtrapati Bhavan, you would first have to travel half the distance of 1.5 kilometers. This will take you some time. But before that, you will have to travel half of the 1.5 kilometers, that is 750 meters, which will take you some time. But before that, you will have to travel half of that distance, that is 375 meters, which will take you some time, and so on. So it seems like not only will you never reach Rashtrapati Bhavan, but you will never even get started from India Gate. Hence, there is no motion, but only the appearance of a motion. Forget about Zeno and Parmenides. Let us ask ourselves, why is this a paradox? Well, we all know that we can easily walk from India Gate to Rashtrapati Bhavan in a finite time, perhaps between 30 and 35 minutes. So we can travel from India Gate to Rashtrapati Bhavan in some finite time, but Zeno tells us that we cannot do it in a finite time. How do we resolve this paradox? Let us see. Now, motion is continuous. One does not stop at the halfway point and then again stop at the next halfway point and again at the next halfway point and so on ad infinitum. If one did then of course one would never reach Rashtrapati Bhavan. Similarly, if the hare had not fallen asleep, he would have easily won the race. So Zeno's point was that the mathematics and physics of the time could not explain motion. They did not have the notion of continuity in mathematics or in physics, which appeared later. Hence, the paradox points out an explanatory gap. We could say at that time that we know that there is motion, but we cannot explain it. Now, let us discuss further on paradoxes. Now, Epimenides, which is a mythical figure, was a Cretan who said all Cretans are liars. By liars, we mean those who always tell lies. Now, if it is true that all Cretans are liars, then it is false that all Cretans are liars, because Epimenides is not telling a lie. So he is one Cretan who does not always lie. Another way to look at it is that if it is true that all Cretans are liars, then Epimenides must be lying when he says that all Cretans are liars. So some Cretans must not be liars. Now suppose that some Cretans are not liars. So all Cretans are liars is false. Let us further assume that every Cretan says all Cretans are liars. Then every Cretan utters a false statement. So indeed, all Cretans are liars because each Cretan is uttering the same false statement, all Cretans are liars, which is false. So this is a classic paradox which is called the liar's paradox. If I assume the proposition to be true, then it turns out to be false. And if I assume the proposition to be false, it turns out to be true. I repeat again that a paradox is not a contradiction, though an apparent contradiction seems to lie behind it when we peel the layer. Here is a simpler version of the liar's paradox. Consider the sentence L, which is I am lying. We call L the liar sentence. Now if L is true, then I am telling the truth. So I am not lying. Therefore, L is false. On the other hand, assume that L is false. But then L is true because I am lying in saying that I am lying, so that I am lying is actually true because I am lying in claiming that it is true when it is false. It gets very technical to give a precise formulation of this, and there is a lot of literature on it. You can look it up if your curiosity is growing. For centuries, solutions were searched for but not found. Alfred Tarski, a great logician, found a solution in terms of the distinction between language and meta-language. This will get too technical for now, so we will leave it. But Tarski said something very interesting. He said, perhaps the paradox can never be resolved, yet as logicians we have to make our best efforts to resolve it. We can take a breather and look at a much simpler paradox. Now, God is supposed to be all-powerful, omnipotent, and the cause of everything. Now we pose this question: can God make a rock that God cannot lift? If God makes such a rock, then God is not all-powerful, as he cannot lift something. If God can lift anything, that it seems then it seems like God cannot make a rock heavy enough so that he cannot lift it. Then God is not really omnipotent. I will leave this paradox as something to ponder upon. We now jump to a very contemporary paradox that came about when Bertrand Russell was working on set theory as a branch of logic. Instead of putting it in the language of set theory, which will be technical though not difficult for us at this moment, we put it in a language that Russell himself used, and it is called Russell's barber metaphor. Suppose that in a small village there is only one barber and he is a male adult. This barber shaves all the men who do not shave themselves. We assume that every male adult shaves or is shaven every day. Now the question is, who shaves the barber? Again, we have a riddle. Let us try to understand it. In the village, there are two sets of adult males. Ones who do not shave themselves and ones who shave themselves. The barber shaves everyone belonging to the set of those who do not shave themselves, and shaves no one belonging to the set of those who shave themselves. Let us put it this way. Set X is the set of men who do not shave themselves. Set Y is the set of people who shave themselves. The barber shaves everyone who belongs to set X, and he does not shave anyone who belongs to set Y. Sets X and Y are obviously mutually exclusive. Now, let us suppose the barber shaves himself. Then he belongs to set Y. It follows then that the barber does not shave himself because he does not shave anyone belonging to set Y. On the other hand, let us now suppose that the barber does not shave himself. Then he belongs to set X. But then the barber must shave himself because he shaves everyone who belongs to set X. We have here a genuine paradox, as if the proposition that the barber shaves himself is true. Then it is false because the barber would not shave the barber because he does not shave those who shave themselves. And if the proposition that the barber shaves himself is false, then it would be true because the barber would shave the barber since he shaves all those who do not shave themselves. Russell initially suggested the humorous solution that the barber has a beard. But this is not a solution. That is why I have inserted that every male adult in the village shaves every day, either himself or by the barber. Okay, so I have tried to put it in a fun way, but when Russell wrote a letter to Gottlob Frege, a great logician who had been working on set theory for years as the foundation of mathematics, he was devastated. He had to go back to ground zero and rework his set theory so that this paradox could be avoided. Such is the impact of genuine paradoxes. If you had some difficulty in understanding the paradox, perhaps you will more easily understand the real paradox in set theory. You're all familiar with sets like 1, 2, 3, which is the set of natural numbers, or 2, 4, 6, 8, which is the set of even numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, the set of odd numbers. Now, Russell's paradox can be stated as follows. There are two kinds of sets, those that are members of themselves and those that are not members of themselves. In other words, X is the set of all those sets that are not members of themselves, and Y is the set of all those sets that are members of themselves. Sets X and Y are mutually exclusive. Just as the set of even numbers and the set of odd numbers are mutually exclusive, just as the set of mothers and the set of fathers are mutually exclusive. Now Russell asks, is set X a member of itself? That is, a member of X? Or is set X not a member of itself? That is, not a member of X. Suppose set X is a member of itself, but then it would be a member of set Y, which is the set of all sets that are members of themselves. So, X is not a member of X. On the other hand, suppose that X is not a member of X, but then X would be a member of X because it is not a member of itself, and X is the set of all sets that are not members of themselves. Hence, if the set X is not a member of itself, then it is a member of itself, and if set X is a member of itself, then set X is not a member of itself. If you have not understood this, please read it again very slowly. If you still don't understand it, do not worry about it. If you have understood the barber's version, you have really understood Russell's paradox. Okay, now let's take another breather and look at another simple paradox. Suppose your logic class meets 6 times a week. Your teacher tells you, next week I will give you a surprise test on one day. But I won't tell you which day that is the surprise. Now, let us suppose your teacher does not give the test from Monday to Friday. Then she will definitely give it on Saturday. In that case, the test on Saturday is not a surprise at all. So, she cannot give it on Saturday. Now, again, suppose that she does not give it from Monday to Thursday. And since she cannot give it on Saturday if it is a surprise, so Friday will also not be a surprise. The same will hold for Thursday if she does not give it from Monday to Wednesday. And the same will be the case if she does not give it on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday will not be a surprise since we have already seen that Saturday, Friday, and Thursday would not be surprises. Again, after Saturday, Friday, Thursday, and Wednesday are ruled out as surprises, and if she does not give it on Monday, then Tuesday would also not be a surprise as she must give it on Tuesday. So she must give it on Monday, but then that is not a surprise as well. Of course, something has gone wrong in the reasoning here, just as in Zeno's paradox. Obviously, she can give a surprise test next week. The problem is in how we understand it. This is called the surprise quiz paradox. Finally, I return to God and to the greatest mind in the past 500 years, and that is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz said that God created the best of all possible worlds. God, of course, can do whatever He wants. Now, if our world is the best of all possible worlds, we ask the question, could God have created another world which was not the best of all possible worlds? If He could not have created such a world, then He cannot choose whatever He wants. In other words, was God determined to create our world as it was the best of all possible worlds? As one would expect, Leibniz has an ingenious solution to this riddle or paradox. He says, of course, God could have created any alternative world as He has the power to do so. However, God was ethically obligated to create this world which is the best of all possible worlds. On the human side, we all have free will, so we can choose to perform any action we want, but we are obligated to perform only right actions and not wrong actions. We do not compromise on free will in choosing to do right actions. Moral obligation is not determinism but an accentuation of free will. Now I'm getting into ethics and moral reasoning, so I will stop here. Thank you so much and stay safe. Thank you.